Episode 5 of Season 2 of The Bad Batch has just dropped and it needs to be broken down, so let's get straight into it. Episode 5 was very much a different sort of Bad Batch episode, taking a lot of inspiration from other franchises such as Indiana Jones. We begin the episode with Wrecker and Omega scavenging in a scrapyard for scraps, specifically looking for a spare compressor. But as they look for a compressor, the two of them stumble upon a few items of interest. Back at Sid's parlor, we hear Phee telling a story to Bolo and Ketch about her encounter with an Octomorph, which is an entirely new creature introduced to Star Wars. In that same story, Phee also mentions that she found the Grand Pearl of Novak, again an entirely new item being introduced. But this could very well refer to the pearl of a krayt dragon, so perhaps Novak is the name of said dragon which the pearl is from. As Hunter and Tech listen in on the story, Tech mentions that every time they hear that story, it always seems to change, which reminds me of another Disney franchise.
Jack Sparrow, isn't it? Captain Jack Sparrow, if you please, sir.
Omega shares with the rest of the crew what she found, and Phee determines that the device Omega is holding is a compass. Phee gets her droid Mel 221 to read the markings, and we learn that they are indeed coordinates for the Kaldar trinary system. And while Kaldar is indeed a new location in Star Wars, a trinary system refers to a star system in which 3 stars orbit one another. And we have seen this type of system before, namely the Batu system. The crew decide to go on a treasure hunt after being convinced by Phee, and on their way to Kaldar, Phee tells Omega another story of hers regarding the blade of Zakata Par. So clearly a lot of new names are introduced in this episode, which does go a long way in building up Phee's character as a swashbuckling treasure hunter. As the team land on the planet, we can clearly see that the surface of the planet has been scorched and little life is to be found. It's a rather dusty and desolate planet, and if you pay close attention to the shape of the landscape, you'll notice that there are these oddly shaped ditches that scar the land. And this is pretty much explained later on when we see the ancient robot blast beams of energy, likely what created these deep scars on the planet's surface. So a little foreshadowing here for the destructive power that the Bad Batch will later encounter. The compass starts to beep and it leads the team to a supposed dead end. That is until Phee realizes that the entrance is merely blocked by rocks. The team make their way in, but not before being spotted by a mysterious creature. Tech remarks that the etchings that they see on the wall are at the very least 1,000 years old. Phee then goes on to conclude that this must be the entranceway to Sakara Null, with links to the ancients, which would then mean that the entire historical site can be traced back to the pre-Republic era. Because of how early this period is in galactic history, much of the recorded information and technology was lost over time. Essentially, pre-Republic history generally encompasses the early development of space travel and was mostly dominated by species such as the Rakatans and the Celestials. It's not entirely clear as to what Phee means by the Ancients, but the Ancients could be in reference to the deities worshipped by the Klatooinian people, and much of this is somewhat reminiscent of the Zepho from Fallen Order, going along the same lines of a forgotten and ancient civilization. Phee then mentions that what is inside is the heart of the mountain, which does remind me of a comic featuring Yoda, in which he too had to find a heart of the mountain. And much like the episode, the heart of the mountain is connected to something far bigger, which in Yoda's case was a living creature. What proceeds next is a series of puzzles that the team need to solve, with Omega mostly solving all of them using her genetically superior intellect. The team are briefly interrupted by the creature, but they nonetheless make it to the heart of the mountain. Phee attempts to remove it from the pedestal, which then awakens the ancient machine, in the process destroying Phee's own droid. And the machine here gives off a lot of Horizon Zero Dawn vibes. This moment here is also really just a slightly different take when Indy tries to swap out the golden statue but ends up triggering a massive trap, giving us the iconic scene. So I guess you could say this is sort of the Star Wars version of it. The team also realized that the machine seems intent on destroying everything, which might also include their ship, which might end up leaving them stranded on this planet. Meanwhile, the creature makes its way into the cockpit, where Wrecker manages to grab it by its tail and throw it out. And the whole action sequence really had plenty of moments that evoked the very familiar story beats of a typical archaeological adventure story, from close calls to unique puzzle traps and of course the mandatory unknown monster. The episode really is just a massive ball of fun. The team managed to deactivate the machine by putting the heart of the stone back to where they got it from, and it also ends up overloading the machine, causing the crystal to melt and the machine to self-destruct. And this is really a bit of a cliche when it comes to archaeological action stories, with the prize item end up getting destroyed or the heroes being forced to leave it behind for the greater good. And a part of this story does have a small message about greed and how we shouldn't let it consume us, lest we get more disastrous consequences.
I can get it. I can almost reach it, Dad. Indiana? Indiana? Let it go.
As the team make their way back, Hunter takes comfort in the idea that no one else will be able to activate it again. Phee then goes on to mention that she will rebuild her droid by the time they reach Vatne, a new planet, which really is just a way to entice Omega's interest to bring along the rest of the crew. Phee talks about a chalice from the kingdom of Elways, which really is a not too subtle nod to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, with Indy chasing after the Holy Grail. I also have to say that this episode probably had one of the best soundtracks in the entire season so far. Not only was it capable of providing an ominous and mysterious ambiance as one would expect from an Indiana Jones-esque episode, but it was also wholly refreshing from the other soundtracks that we have heard so far this season, which really goes a long way to help this particular episode stand out from the rest. While this episode was most definitely a filler episode, it was definitely quite a fun one. I actually enjoyed this filler episode far more than the previous one simply because it offered something far more refreshing. And to me, it reconfirms the idea that we definitely need a Star Wars show that is more Indiana Jones-esque. An intergalactic archaeologist going around looking for long-lost secrets and treasures would do wonders for Star Wars world building, especially regarding that pre-Republic era. And it would also be a nice change of pace from the usual Star Wars action stories that we get. I am aware that there are indeed the Dr. Aphra comics that basically play on this premise, so if you want more of the stuff that we see in this episode, I highly recommend you check them out. But I still think that it would be nice to have a live action version for Star Wars fans to enjoy. Anyways, that's all for this video. Be sure to like and subscribe, and be sure to leave a comment down below. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.